Well, greetings from this exotic space, the atrium in Doha International Airport. I have never been one to really uh, vlog anything, but I've had too many people ask me to send them all the details of this journey. So, yeah, I'm beginning right now with my layover. And yes, like all Gulf State airports, the airport in Qatar is just something else. So, anyway, I boarded my flight, and after a brief stop in Dar es Salaam, we landed at Kilimanjaro International Airport, where I was picked up by my guides and driven to my hotel. And this being my first time in Africa, it was just fascinating driving through the farmland and the villages, seeing how people here live. Well, greetings from my hotel room on day one of the journey as I enjoy my last taste of civilization while waiting for the guide to pick me up. I took a shower this morning and I used my hair dryer, but I did not bother putting any products in because no one ever went to Kilimanjaro to look pretty, and that's why I'm already looking worse now than I did yesterday with that I just slept on a plane look. My guides picked me up from my hotel and we are on our way to the Machame trailhead, elevation 5,910 feet according to my phone. This is a hike that typically takes 7 days, or 6 if you're crazy enough. My tour operator was KiliQuests, and even though I'm only recording this narration at the end of day one, they have done a phenomenal job thus far. The trail itself was crowded. My guide said this was more than twice as many people that he saw last week. Unfortunately, the crowds on the trail kept the wildlife away, but it was still interesting walking through a tropical rainforest at the same elevation I grew up at. Also, unfortunately, my trusty old hiking boots split open when I stepped on a stick, of all things. That will make things interesting in coming days. Alright, well, now it's dinner time on the evening of day one. Some fantastic food right here. We did pretty good time getting up to the first camp. It took us a little over 4 hours for 11 kilometers and a 4,000-foot elevation gain. We actually did such good time that my guide and I discussed the possibility of making this a 6-day trek rather than a 7-day trek, so we'll see what happens. But feeling great, and the food's fantastic. There we go. Video editing on the mountain. Alright, well, it's a little after 6 a.m. on the morning of day 2, and the camp is already alive with the sounds of people waking up. After extracting myself from bed, or sleeping bag, I made my way to our portable toilet, and while I won't go into any further details, let's just say it was 1,000 times nicer than the campsite's public toilets. I added creatine powder to my herbal tea. I found it does a great job at helping me maintain my stamina doing things like this. I examined my boots. The damage was worse than I thought. Both of them had split open on the bottom, and mud had gotten inside yesterday. I had to wipe down my orthotic inserts and my feet before going to bed. Luckily, my amazing guide was able to arrange to have a new pair of shoes delivered to the campsite by the end of day 2. So, after a fantastic breakfast and spectacular morning view, we hit the trail. Luckily, it wasn't as muddy as yesterday, but it was steeper. As the vegetation changed to smaller, thinner plants, the views became incredible. The camera doesn't do them justice. As we progressed higher, the clouds rolled in until we hit Shira Camp just in time for lunch, and just before it started raining. Well, it's closing in at 1 p.m. on day 2. We arrived at the camp about an hour ago. Only took us about 3 hours 40 minutes to make the 2,670 foot-ish climb. We are now at about 12,620 feet. It's been good so far, and lunch is fantastic. I set up shop in the tent, where I am now editing this morning's footage as rain pelts on the canvas overhead and thunder rumbles around me. Am I a fool for using a laptop on a mountain during a thunderstorm? Probably, but I have that early 30s invincibility complex. Sorry, Mom. At almost 4 o'clock on the dot, the rain stopped and the sun came out. My guide and I walked to a point nearby overlooking the camp, passing the caves where people used to sleep. I especially found the massive crows living at this elevation fascinating. The temperature swung all over the place today. I gained and shed additional layers more times than I can count. After returning to my tent, I noticed a helicopter heading toward the neighboring camp. Looks as if somebody's getting an expensive ride downhill. And even though I already pointed this out, after spending all day yesterday among thick vegetation, the views higher up are incredible, as long as the clouds aren't occluding everything, that is. And now it's dinner time on the mountain, starting out with some fantastic soup, and I imagine the main course is going to be phenomenal as well. One thing that I found particularly interesting to note is right now I'm having the time of my life. 20 years ago, when I was in Boy Scouts, I viewed camping as a form of punishment, and admittedly, it didn't really help that my dad was my scoutmaster and made camping seem more like a chore than anything else. Sorry, Dad, it's the truth. If only I could see myself now. I'm also going to admit I deeply appreciate how spotty the internet is up here. Alright, breakfast time, day 3. It's getting colder and it was pretty windy last night, so I'm looking forward to moving again to warm back up. As soon as we left Shira Camp, the remaining vegetation thinned and the landscape became more volcanic. The summit was tantalizingly visible during the morning ascent. One especially exciting element was hitting a new personal milestone as I exceeded Mount Evans's 14,260-ish foot elevation in Colorado. We reached the day's pinnacle, Lava Tower Camp, elevation 15,220 feet according to my phone, in about 2 hours 45 minutes at 11 o'clock. While most trekkers eat a hot lunch at Lava Tower, our pace has been strong enough that my guide felt confident in waiting to eat lunch until we reached our destination camp, which would be around the same time most other groups reached Lava Tower. So after a 30-ish minute acclimation break, during which a new friend sought to partake from my snacks, I didn't give it any, we began our journey downhill as the mist began rolling in. This was slower going for me since my ankles roll easily, especially on wet, uneven surfaces. We reached Barranco Camp around 1:30, just as it started raining again. And now we're at Barranco Camp, elevation 13,110-ish feet, according to my phone. It's a little after 2:45, just had a fantastic lunch, and sorry, forgot to take a photo. The views here are great at the camp, but I'm waiting until the weather decides to actually stop raining for once and for all before I get out and take some pictures of the environs. We made the 10-kilometer trek from the previous camp in about 4 hours 45 minutes, not including a half-hour break at the Lava Tower, and we're already done for the day. Since I'm outpacing most other groups, I have a lot of free time on my hands. So if you find yourself hiking Kilimanjaro and if you have a lot of physical stamina, I recommend bringing a good book or movie with you and just loading it onto an iPad. Or if you're crazy enough, you could also try bringing a laptop for video editing. Good morning, breakfast time, day 4, starting out with some fantastic millet porridge. I realize I'm saying the word fantastic a lot, or excellent, or just all of these modifiers, but I've really been enjoying just about everything except for being cold at night, which it wasn't as cold last night, so Maybe that either means it wasn't as cold last night or just means that I'm getting used to the cold at night. It did rain off and on last evening up until I fell asleep, but now it's clear-ish again. There are some people already heading uphill. We decided to make this a 6-day trek indeed. So, yeah. I discovered quickly why people were already heading up the hill when I recorded that intro at 7 a.m. There was a choke point that turned into a massive traffic jam. We waited and waited and waited and waited some more, but at least spirits were high. More than an hour after we left Barranco camp, it was still visible. The traffic jam was caused by choke points during what was the most technically challenging element of the trek thus far, scaling rock faces. But finally we made it to the top, and then it was traversing rises and valleys through an increasingly Martian landscape, while the average elevation remained the same. Karanga Camp came into view, with a formidable-looking valley and rise in front of it, but we made it, about 3 hours 44 minutes, elevation 13,310 feet. We would have done better time if it weren't for the traffic jam. My porters had set up a tent with a hot lunch at Karanga Camp, and if we had been doing a 7-day trek, we would have spent the night there. But we continued onward, just as it started raining, albeit lightly, off and on. We proceeded upward through a misty landscape until we reached Barafu Camp, elevation approximately 15,340 feet, total trekking time, not including lunch, 5 hours 53 minutes. Barafu Camp was a lot less crowded than Karanga Camp, so it looks as if we'll be leaving a big chunk of the crowds behind. Hopefully. And now it's coming up on dinner time, day 4. I am trying to edit what I can before dinner because we're going to be getting up around 2 a.m. It was around the time when I reached this camp that I actually started to finally feel the effects of elevation. Even now my breathing feels a little more labored than usual, but we walked up another 300 meters or so, 200 meters, something, just to acclimatize a little bit more, and then came back to camp, and it was remarkably easier to breathe down here. So, hoping that in the next approximately 7 hours, I will continue to acclimatize before we tackle the summit. All right. 2:30 a.m. summit day. Eating breakfast in the tent. It is icy in here. Also, forget what I said about getting used to being cold. Last night was the coldest I've ever been since probably one of those Boy Scout campouts in the winter where we weren't allowed to have a fire because of fire danger. Yeah. Most trekkers begin the final ascent around midnight to be near the summit by sunrise, but our pace had been so good my guide decided to leave at 3 a.m. instead. We could see everybody else's lights up the slopes ahead of us. It was cold, but I was exerting myself enough that within minutes I started shedding layers. We made good time and caught up with the tail end of the midnight trekkers at sunrise around 6:30. My guide became my cinematographer since using my phone became too onerous given my non-touchscreen friendly gloves. We reached Stella Point around 7:20, and at this point I wanted to lie down and take a nap. But we persisted for another 48 minutes until we reached the summit. Okay. Alright. 4 hours, 57 minutes. To those of you who expressed doubt in my ability to do this, and you know who you are, in your face. We got the obligatory photo at the summit sign after navigating anarchy, enjoyed the summit, then began our descent. And now I'm sitting in high camp, only 12,550 feet. Unfortunately, I have scant post-summit descent footage and photos. I was too exhausted. I'm no stranger to endurance workouts, but today was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. While going up was relatively straightforward, after all I just had to maintain a pace, toward the summit it got to the point where raising my phone to take a photo left me short of breath. We descended, and my guides actually had to assist me twice, mostly because of my ankle's tendency to roll going downhill, but I was also at the point where I wouldn't be able to regain my balance if I slipped. It took about 2 hours 35 minutes to return to Barathu camp, where I took a nap before eating lunch, and then we headed downhill to high camp, which took a little under 2 hours. It snowed and rained during our 6-kilometer journey to high camp, which further reinforced the wisdom of making this a 6-day trek. I can't imagine what it must be like trekking through even thicker crowds through a snowscape. So, total trekking time today, not including the breaks at the summit and for nap/lunch, was about 9 hours 20 minutes. I'll sleep well tonight, that I know. Well, a very good morning on day 6. I've been able to receive messages, but I haven't really been able to send any, so everybody doesn't know that I actually summited the mountain yesterday. They all think I'm doing it today. We'll be back at the parking area around noon or a little after, and I am looking forward to taking a nice hot shower. I caught a whiff of myself today. Yeah. Yeah. Day 6 in high camp dawned above the clouds with beautiful views of the summit I had scaled not even 24 hours earlier. The trail downhill was steep, muddy, and rocky, exactly the sort of conditions that could cause my ankles to roll. Parts of the path were paved with stone, which helped. The plants grew bigger and taller as we proceeded. We made it down to Nweka camp, elevation approximately 10,168 feet, in about 1 hour 45 minutes, and then we continued down through similar trail conditions until my ankles finally betrayed me and I fell, but luckily I wasn't hurt, just a sore hand for a few hours. I was even slower going down after that, but finally we made it to Nweka Gate, an elevation approximately 5,630 feet, with total trekking time about 5 hours 15 minutes. I'm a rarity in that going downhill is slower than going up. Right after arriving and getting into the car, a fierce hellstorm developed. We drove back into town, where I had a well-earned pepper steak lunch. As you might have been able to gauge by the background noise I couldn't entirely filter away, I'm finishing this report on my return flight following several showers, good night's sleep, and 2 days of safari. I just didn't have it in me to do a recording when I returned to civilization. This trip has its genesis when I was in high school, when I developed a fascination with volcanoes, a simmering interest in Eastern Africa, and a love of hiking. This all came to a head a few years ago when I discovered that Kilimanjaro has one of the highest summits in the world accessible without specialized equipment or technical skills. Suddenly, Kilimanjaro became a bucket list item. Then, last year, some friends from church did a Kili trek and recommended their excursion company. I realized I should take the plunge, since I'm at the point in my life where I have the health and resources to do such an excursion, and who knows how long I'll be in this position. If I learned one thing from COVID, it's take advantage of the opportunities you have now, since you'll never know when the window will close. I didn't do much preparation beyond the scope of my regular workout regimen, which is between 23 and 63 minutes of cardio, yes, that's specific, and a weight circuit 6 days a week. But leading up to the trek, I stuck to the upper bounds of my typical cardio times, and I also spent time walking on a treadmill with maximum incline and did some high-intensity interval training workouts that involved a lot of squatting and jumping. Aside from being cold in the mornings, my biggest complaint was other people. I hate crowds and usually try to plan my travel in off-peak seasons, but unlike most Northern Hemisphere destinations, February is peak season for Kili. Oops, but I also acknowledge I wouldn't want to do this trek during the rainy season. Still, I got annoyed by the sheer number of people who found it necessary to play music on the trail. Haven't they heard of headphones? And as I mentioned earlier, there were some times when the crowds prevented me from going at my preferred pace and potentially from seeing wildlife. You do the best you can. I went through dozens of wet wipes and a bunch of hand sanitizer. At the camp, the porters would supply hot water and hand soap, and I had a portable toilet delivered to each campsite.
But as was evident in the video, I wore the same clothes day after day. I never showered. One thing I noticed was that during the final 4,000 feet up the mountain, there was a lot of human feces along the trail. I guess when you gotta go, you gotta go. There's no dignity above 15,000 feet. And no, I'm not admitting to anything. The porters are unsung heroes. I thought I had physical stamina, but there's something else. They're the ones who make the trip bearable and, in many cases, possible. While I almost certainly could have completed the trek solo with no assistance, well, that legally isn't possible. Porters and guides are required. Considering how one of my least favorite elements of camping is making and breaking camp, I'm glad I never had to do that myself. And there's nothing like a freshly prepared hot meal after what amounts to a multi-hour cardio session. Yes, I would absolutely do this again. No regrets. But I would do a different route for variety, because there are several routes up the mountain. And even though I liked going solo because I was able to go at my own pace, next time I would want to have somebody along to share the experience. There you go.